Okay. Welcome everybody to our April general meeting. We're happy to have two sets of speakers today, so we'll be splitting our time into two. Our first hour, we have Dr. Bradley Onishi. He'll be speaking about white Christian nationalism and Project 2025 and the impact on democracy. And then our second hour will be a panel of faith leaders who will be talking really about Christian nationalism and the impact on Christianity. So I think it'll be an interesting conversation today. We'll have time for questions at the end of each hour. So we'll get into that when we get there. So I want to introduce Dr. Bradley Onishi. He is an evangelical minister turned religion professor and is the founder of Access Mundi Media, a media platform dedicated to making scholarly research on Christian nationalism, authoritarianism, and extremist movements accessible to the public, turning academic insights into tools for democracy. Brad is the co-host of Straight White American Jesus podcast and the award-winning author of Preparing for War, The Extremist History of White Christian Nationalism and What Comes Next, published in 2023. And has a forthcoming book, American Caesar, How Theocrats and Tech Lords Are Turning America into a Monarchy, which will be out in September, but it's available for pre-order now. He has written for or been featured in major media and publications such as the New York Times, NPR, PBS, Rolling Stone, and CNN, giving expert commentary on evangelical politics and Christian nationalism. So we're really fortunate to have Brad with us here today. And with that, I'll turn it over to Brad.
Thank you so much for having me. It is wonderful to be here. Thank you to everyone at Indivisible Livermore who just is doing amazing work to protect democracy, and for the invitation to return and talk about what I see happening in our country right now. I want to talk today about what I will call Christian supremacy. And so let me share my presentation with you and talk about what I mean. So there's a phrase out there, Jesus is king. And I want to break that down because I think it's a decoder ring for understanding where we are in terms of the breakdown of the separation of church and state in the country and the kind of developments that have taken place over the last year and a half since Trump took office again. So my new book is American Caesar. I outline all of that. I outline everything I'm talking about today in that book. So if you have any desire to learn more, read more, or support me, pre-ordering American Caesar is the best thing to do on any of those fronts. So I converted to evangelicalism as a 14-year-old, and I shared this last time I was with y'all, but I was 14. It was 1995. I went from a kid who was deep in a grunge era, listening to Pearl Jam and Nirvana and getting in trouble at school, to a really zealous evangelical convert. But I converted right at the end of the moral majority era, the religious right era. I don't know, I'm sure many of you are old enough to remember Jerry Falwell and Tim LaHaye and Pat Robertson and Billy Graham and everybody who was involved with the religious right and the moral majority. And something that is really important in that era, and I want to just talk about an era that lasted from, say, 1965 until 2008. The idea behind the moral majority is that there was a moral majority that was an evangelical Christian and Catholic majority in the country that wanted to restrict rights for most people, women, gay folks, wanted to restrict immigration, wanted to impose Christianity on everybody. There was this idea that if they could just wake up the majority of the country, get them to vote, then the country would sort of turn out to be what they wanted. And I'm not going to go into detail about the religious right today and everything they championed. People like Phyllis Schlafly or Connie Marshner, again, Jerry Falwell, Paul Weyrich, people that really supported Ronald Reagan over Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan being the, twice divorced California governor / Hollywood actor, rather than Jimmy Carter, the Southern Baptist Sunday school teacher and military officer. That history has been told, and if you're interested in that, you can read my book, Preparing for War, and a million other books out there. Here's what I'm really interested in, though. When I converted in 1995, I really took to heart this idea that we could win hearts and minds. And that was the cultural kind of milieu at the time in the evangelical world. We need to persuade. We need to go out and woo people to follow Jesus. And what I would argue is something happened around 2008, and I think some of you know what I'm talking about, but somebody named Barack Obama was elected to be president, right? And here was kind of the antithesis to everything that they thought the Christian nation was going to be. Here's a man who was the first black president, which race was always a huge part of the religious right and the moral majority. He was somebody whose dad was an immigrant, who was mixed race, who grew up most of his time, some of his life at least, in Hawaii. Somebody they said was a Muslim, right? Even though there was never evidence of that, somebody they said was never a citizen. Barack Obama was, to me, the defeat of that religious right era. And in 2008, he's elected. And in the course of his two-term presidency, Obergefell happens. Gay marriage is now legal across the United States. And it seems as if the dream of the moral majority has gone by the wayside. And there's this realization in the evangelical world, in the Christian nationalist world, in the conservative Catholic world, that we are not the majority. We're just not. Robert P. Jones, the great sociologist and writer, has chronicled how in 2009, 2010, it's the first time that the United States is not a majority white Christian nation. So it's still a majority white nation, but it's not a majority white Christian nation. So the feeling that most evangelicals had during that Obama era is backed up by the statistics. They were no longer, the white Christian was no longer the majority in the country for the first time in the country's history. Now, what that led to, and I think this leads directly into what I want to talk about today, is to a different understanding of how to approach culture and how to gain power in politics and in business and in every other sector of the United States. This is a man named Jake Lang. Jake Lang is somebody who is running for Senate in Florida. In many ways, he's simply a shock jock stormtrooper who is trying to get attention for himself on YouTube and other places. He's also somebody who was pardoned for his crimes or alleged crimes at J6. But Jake Lang recently went to Dearborn, Michigan. And Dearborn, Michigan, I'm sure many of you are aware, is one of the few Muslim majority cities in the United States. About 55% of people in Dearborn are Muslim. So he chose to go there in order to carry a cross around the town to say that America is against Islamification. He went to the city hall and he gave a disgusting homophobic, Islamophobic rant at the city hall meeting in front of the entire elected officials, the entire slate of elected officials in Dearborn, including the mayor. I thought about playing that for you. I'm not going to play it. There's so many disgusting words and slurs in there that it's not worth it. But I want to highlight something. Is at the end of his rant, after saying that Muslims were inferior, that they had taken over the country, that they had built nothing, were worth nothing, and they should get out of his country, he was escorted out by security. And he did so by yelling and screaming, "Jesus is King. Jesus is King." If you watch the video, if you're bored tonight and you want to look him up, type in Jake Lang Dearborn to YouTube or somewhere else, and you'll see that he yells "Jesus is King" about 100 times. And one of the things that I would argue is this. When we get to 2008 and Barack Obama becomes president, the idea of the moral majority goes by the wayside. And by the time we get to the first Trump presidency, there's this sense that war and bullying is what's needed. The idea of winning the majority is gone. And what's needed now is just simply to find somebody who will hurt the people that need to be hurt so the country can be put back in order. Over the course of the 10 years, 2015 to 2026, that has only amplified. It's only amplified to the point that I no longer think, and this is my argument for today, that much of what we might have called Christian nationalism is actually best described using that term. I think we need to use the term Christian supremacy. And I know some of you are like, well, what's the difference? You sound like a professor. A term is a term. Come on, buddy. Who cares? And here's what I would say. Here's the most famous sentence in American history, if you ask me. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal. They're endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I don't know of a more famous sentence in American history. And it promises to every one of us that we have the same rights. We are equal under the law. Now, we've never fulfilled that. It's always been an incomplete practice of an American experiment. Nonetheless, the idea is that we are part of a power sharing agreement. However, we've gotten to the place over the last decade where those folks who once thought of themselves as the moral majority realize they are now the stark minority. They are not a majority of the country. Whether you talk about the racial demographics changing, whether you talk about the rise of non-religious people in the United States, whether you simply talk about people of faith, Christians, Protestants and Catholics, Muslims and Buddhists, Hindus and others who would say, yeah, we're religious folks, but we have no interest in this kind of right-wing imposition of religion on all people. They're not the majority, and they know that. So now the move is to say, well, if democracy won't get us power, then democracy is the problem. Democracy, this promise of equality, this promise of having the same rights, that's probably the issue here. Instead of us trying to pretend we're still the majority, we're now going to make democracy the problem because democracy gives power to the majority, which we no longer are. So here's my argument. A lot of you have heard a lot about Christian nationalism over the last 2 or 3 years. There's books being written about it. There's a cottage industry of folks like me who write and podcast and speak about Christian nationalism all the time. We even have people like Marjorie Taylor Greene or others who've said, yes, I'm a proud Christian nationalist. Go ahead, call me that. Doug Wilson, Pete Hegseth's theological mentor, he calls himself a Christian nationalist and says, sure, if that's what you want to call me, you're right. Here's the thing. Christian nationalism is a cultural identity that seeks to privilege Christians in the United States over all others by way of a historical narrative and ideology. So if you imagine with me, every kind of American sitting around a round table, and you think of folks who are coming from Maine and Oregon, people who are coming from Texas and New Mexico, Kansas and Nebraska. You think of folks who are white, folks who are black, folks who are Asian, folks who are Latino, everybody, Native American, and so on. People who are immigrants, first generation, people whose ancestors go back to the Mayflower. Christian nationalism goes like this. Look, it's great that you're all here at the table. We got our American Round Table, Declaration of Independence. Everybody gets equality. Yay, woohoo, glad to hear it. Just one thing, while we're here around the table, I need you to know that as a Christian, and especially a white Christian, I'm always just going to get a higher place at the table than you. Yeah, you can be at the table, and you can be in the country, and that's all good. As long as you know your place, and you know that, like, I'm just going to get a more of a say here. Because the country was built for me, and it was built by people like me, so that's why I get more of a say than you, okay? And if everyone can just hang with me on that, then we'll be fine. We'll be fine. To me, that is the Christian nationalism of the George W. Bush era. That's the Christian nationalism of the religious right and the moral majority that told the civil rights movement to stop it. That said to women in the 60s and 70s and 80s, you know, go back home, take care of the kids, and let's just stop all of this with equality in the workplace and equality when it comes to pay and no sexual harassment. I mean, let's just cut all that out, right? This is the Christian nationalism of that era. But what I would argue is we've reached a new era, right? We've reached an era of Christian supremacy. Now, I always say this, and I just want to say it because we're recording this, and people are always accusing me of just saying, well, you know, if you love God and love your country, I don't know what's wrong with that, right? And here's what I always say, and I hope you'll hear me on this. You can take this away and explain it to your neighbor or your cousin or whoever says that Christian nationalism is overblown. There's nothing wrong with loving God and loving your country. That's not Christian nationalism. Christian nationalism is the idea that you should get more of the country because you love God or your God. That's Christian nationalism, okay? But what I would argue now is that this day, January 6, 2021, was really a day that is infamous in American history for a lot of reasons. But for me, it's the moment that Christian supremacy supplanted Christian nationalism. And you're like, well, what does that mean? It means that this is the day that democracy went out the window. This is the day that the Declaration of Independence and the equality for everybody was left behind. This is the day that people showed up and said, if we're not the majority, we'll just take it by force. Who cares? We'll show up, we'll break down the Capitol, we'll hurt people, we'll kill police officers, we'll attack police officers, and we will try to find Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer or whoever we can find and hurt them too. But what's the ideology there? The ideology here is a turning point. It's a turning point that goes from, hey, everybody around the table here, look, just remember, I'm the Christian, I get more of a say to you. That transforms. So instead of a round table where you have the Hindu immigrant in Atlanta, where you have the Black Muslim family in New York City, where you have the Chinese immigrant family in LA, instead of a table where there are queer folks, trans folks, and everyone you can think of in the American landscape, there's now a podium where the white Christian American says, look, this is my country. And most of you are unassimilable here because you come from inferior civilizations or because you have an identity that is so askew from the national ethos of this place that you will never be a real American, and you're actually a danger and a threat to us by simply existing. It says not, I should get a little bit more status than you. That's Christian nationalism. It says you will never be one of us, and you either need to get out or face the consequences. That's Christian supremacy. It looks at folks who come from non-European backgrounds, looks at folks who are not Christians, including Jews, and says, you are not one of us, and you never will be. You who are Muslim, you who are Hindu, you who are godless, I'm sorry. It's not just that I should have more than you in terms of this country. It's that if you're in the country, you're threatening my way of life, and I'm not sure I can abide by that, and you might need to go somewhere else. Here's Kevin Roberts. Now, Kevin Roberts is the leader of the Heritage Foundation. The Heritage Foundation is, of course, the institution that gave us Project 2025. And one of the things that he said, and this is a clip from right before the presidential election in 2024, is if you listen closely, he says, we need a second American revolution.
The reason that so many anchors on MSNBC, for example, are losing their minds daily is because our side is winning. And so I come full circle in this response and just want to encourage you with some substance that we are in the process of the Second American Revolution, which will remain bloodless if the left allows it to be.
Okay, so we are in the midst of a second American Revolution that will remain bloodless if they let it, right? If you don't tick me off and you don't make me angry, says the abusive father, then nobody will get hurt, right? Why? What is a second American Revolution? Well, Kevin Roberts is a traditional reactionary anti-modern Catholic. And my argument in my book, and I don't have time to go through all of it today, so don't worry, I'm not going to try to cram 300 pages into my presentation today, is this. There is a large-scale vision on the part of Catholics, reactionary Catholics, non-Vatican II Catholics like Kevin Roberts, as well as their evangelical siblings, as well as many technocrats in Silicon Valley and in San Francisco and other parts of the country. There's a desire for an American Revolution that would seat a king, seat a Caesar, put in power an autocrat, a tech lord, rather than a get away from. one. The first American Revolution was all about, we need to get away from this king. We can't have taxation without representation. We can't have the parliament over there in England telling us what to do. We need our own country. We need to get away from monarchy in favor of democracy. The argument I'm making now is we need to get away from democracy in order to get to monarchy. Why? So that the people who are superior to everyone else can be in power. And those people are no longer the majority. So we'll have to take it by force. No more of this voting stuff. No more of this abiding by the checks and balances, the separation of powers. That's all getting in the way. How many times have you heard a Trump official complain about the courts and the activist judges? How many times have you heard them complain about having their violent, inhumane policies deemed unconstitutional? Well, this is all just getting in the way. The judicial branch, Congress, I mean, come on. What does Mike Johnson keep saying? If we don't have a majority come the midterms, Donald Trump's presidency is basically over. Basically saying, if Congress is not ours, then the legislative branch is just going to get in the way of the executive. What's the whole ideology behind Project 2025? I know many of you here today have dug into it. The whole goal is an unbound executive, clearing out any administrative or bureaucratic obstacles to one person having as much power as possible. Why? Because if you have one person who is the Messiah, who is the Caesar, who is the king, they can impose a vision on everyone else, even if everyone else, a majority of everyone else, doesn't want what they are doing, doesn't want what they're selling. Let me see if I can get there we go. Now, here's Joel Webbin. This is a man named Joel Webbin. He is a Protestant. So Kevin Roberts is Catholic. This is Joel Webbin. He's part of the cadre of pastors and theologians who are in the mix of Pete Hegseth's denomination, the CREC, which is the figurehead is a guy named Doug Wilson, who I'm sure many of you have heard about. Joel Webbin is kind of part of this cadre. And here he is talking about who should be able to hold office.
Judges who dissented, again, Jackson, Kagan, Sotomayor, all three of them women. One of them, Kagan, is a Jew, and Sotomayor is a second-generation Puerto Rican immigrant. What we need, if we're going to succeed as a nation, we need many things. First and foremost, we need repentance of our sin and turning in faith to the Lord Jesus Christ. But in terms of practicalities, political solutions, we need men in office. We need them not to be Jewish or Islamic or anything else, but Christian men in office. And we need them to be American Christian men in office. I have a dream, brothers and sisters. It's a simple dream. I don't feel like it's that big of an ask, right? There's other things we could get more technical. I've talked in more specificities about my position in the past, but if I could just have three things, it would be this. When it comes to the political rulers, the civil magistrate in our nation, I would like them to be Christian American men.
Okay, so if you couldn't tell, people like Joel Webbin are those who believe that the 19th Amendment should be repealed. They believe that only men should be able to vote, and as you heard him say, hold office. No one who's Jewish, no one who's Muslim, no one who's not Christian. This is something reiterated by Doug Wilson, again, Pete Hegseth's theological mentor. And you might be thinking, well, all right, at least he still wants elections. I mean, this sounds pretty terrible. Only men, only Christian men. But come on, Professor Onishi, like you're saying that, we need a king, right? I mean, that's at least he still wants elections, even if it sounds something out of like the 1700s or the 1600s rather than the 21st century. But here he is saying what we really need because things actually have gotten so bad that the elections may not help.
We're degenerates. We're not even close to we're degenerates. The Constitution is not suited for governing degenerates. For governing degenerates, and I'm curious your thoughts on this, if you agree, disagree. But I think for our population that is degraded morally and culturally, as religiously, as far as we have, you need power. men must be governed. you need a Caesar type, Now, if you're asking me my preference, that would probably be my preference, would be a constitutional republic. But I think the conditions for that is a moral people. So I think you can work towards that in the future. But I don't think constitutioning even harder is going to get us out of our current mess. I don't see us getting out of this apart from things getting worse and worse, and then eventually, like a Caesar type rising through the ranks, a populist, figure, and the people, the political will, the people are desperate, and they're like, yes, do it, so and so, and then so and so, Constitution be damned, just rules with an iron fist.
Okay, so Kevin Roberts wants a second American Revolution. Joel Webbin says, yeah, we'll probably get to the place where Constitution be damned, rule by an iron fist. And that's just where we are. Because why? Because we're not moral. Well, what does he mean by we're not moral? Well, majority of people aren't Christian, at least in the way he wants them to be. Majority of folks are not abiding by his idea of what, a moral person is. Gen Z has the most folks who identify as queer in any generation in American history. We're going to be minority majority very soon as a nation. So that's what he means by immoral, is people who don't look like him, who don't believe like him, who don't have the same holy book as him. That's what he means. He's expressing something that is no longer on the fringe of American conservative Christianity. It's that if we are not the majority and we can't get people in line by convincing them, Caesar it is. And I can give you, and I do in my book, I can give you 10 more examples of 10 more pastors, 20 more theologians who want this, who are saying, look, this is probably our only option at this point. To me, that is not Christian nationalism. That is not saying, hey, we need a Christian nation. Let's get back to it, huh? Merry Christmas again. Yeah, come on. Everybody get back to church. Good old patriotic American old-time religion. No. This is a desire for Christian supremacy. We have to take power. Not through elections, not through convincing, not through persuasion, but by force. Constitution be damned. That's what he said. Here's another example. This is Stephen Wolfe, who wrote a book called The Case for Christian Nationalism, and he wants us to have a Christian prince. This divine presence in the prince speaks to his role beyond civil administration. Through him, as the mediator of divine rule, the prince brings God near to the people. The prince is a sort of national God, not in the sense of being divine himself or in materially transcending common humanity, or as an object of prayer or spiritual worship, or as a means of salvific grace, but as the mediator of divine rule for this nation. The mediator of divine rule for this nation. That's not, hey, Christians, we're kind of like elevated status, right? We have a little bit more privilege than everyone else. This is divine rule for this nation. He embodies the people as one who, by divine power, executes their will for themselves. He is a master in the master's universe. Once again, the call for a Christian prince. I read Caesar. Some folks call for a Protestant Franco. Some folks call for an American Pinochet. Folks just up the road from y'all in the city, people like Peter Thiel, call for a tech CEO, a monarch. People like Curtis Yarvin want us to have a tech lord who owns the people and the land. And that is the vision. Here's one more. I promise I'll stop because some of you are like, I need to get out of here, take a shower, wash my face, drink some whiskey or something, because this is a little much. According to Pastor Andrew Isker, Christianity should send queer people through the wood chipper. He comes to the razor's edge of declaring his enemies less than human. There's nothing meaningful we hold in common with them from which we can form mutual understanding. Once again, this is not your grandmother's religious right, or your father's religious right, or your religious right. I don't know how old y'all are. As a result, he advises his flock that instead of trying to evangelize to them, like the Apostle Paul did to the Greeks in the book of Acts, you must do what Jesus did when opposing those who are incapable of acting in good faith. You hold them in derision. That is Christ-like. In other words, war is the only option, since there is no possibility of working together, living peacefully in the same civil space, or finding common ground. It is a battle for domination and survival. So, again, I'm done. No more examples. I'm sure some of you are like, we get the point. If I had another hour, I would show you something else that's a big part of my book, and I think a big part of this story, and that's this. You all live in the Bay Area. You know that since the 90s, folks have thought about Silicon Valley as a kind of center-left place, the place of Google and Amazon Google and Facebook and Apple, a place where people go to work and they can play ping pong and sit on a beanbag and wear Birkenstocks, and it's just a kind of different kind of corporate vibe. The idea for a long time was this sort of laid back West Coast style that lend itself to a kind of neoliberal politics. But we now live in the era of tech domination, tech feudalism. We live in the era of Meta and Palantir and the PayPal mafia, the era where it feels like the billionaire tech lords want as much control over all of us as possible. The argument I make in my book, and I'll just mention it here without going into a ton of detail, is that there's a reason you're seeing tech lords like Peter Thiel, Alex Karp, the leader of Palantir, people like Curtis Yarvin, who's kind of become the darling of the dissident right in Silicon Valley. They are finding common ground with the Christian supremacists I'm talking about today, because they all see themselves as saving Western civilization. Have you seen that rhetoric? We need to save Western civilization. You know who says that all the time? Is Elon Musk. And the argument I would make is that you have a group of tech lords who are really not Christian in any meaningful sense, but they're convinced they're saving Western civilization. They're saving it from trans people. They're saving it from immigrants. They're saving it from low birth rates and white replacement theory. And what they're doing is saying, well, we actually have a lot in common with people like Kevin Roberts or Joel Webbin or Doug Wilson, because we all want to like save Western civ. We're all against the woke, liberal folks who want crazy revolutionary things like, I don't know, democracy. Famously, Peter Thiel said all the way back in 2009, I no longer believe that freedom and democracy are compatible. Who is the man that has become the leading theorist of Silicon Valley? The man who has the ear of J.D. Vance, the man who's been covered by the New York Times and New York Magazine, the man who is everywhere you look when it comes to young tech kids finding a voice that they can believe in. It's Curtis Yarvin, the man who says democracy is the worst idea to ever appear in Western civilization, the man who argues that what we need is a monarchy that would solve every problem, that what's more important than freedom, liberation, equality is order, that we need to socially engineer a society that is free from bugs, free from glitches, free from things like human messiness and dignity. They now see themselves as aligned with Christian supremacists, not because they go to church every day or read their Bible on a regular basis, but because they see themselves as the superior ilk who can save our civilization from the people they call orcs, the people they call inferior, not worth it, less than. Here's the 5 things they share, and then I'll be quiet and would love to have questions and comments and all kinds of things. The 5 things they share is they believe liberalism is the devil. And when I say liberalism, I don't mean the Democratic Party. What I mean is the political ideology of liberalism, the idea that we are all free individuals who have human rights and deserve to be able to choose how to live our lives. If you go into the writings of Kevin Roberts or Curtis Yarvin, if you go into the writings of Doug Wilson and others, they will all tell you that everything went wrong when we gave people equality and the choice to live their lives as they want. That's when it all went bad. Now, of course, liberalism and democracy go hand in hand. And so I'll get there in a minute. Now, number 2, and this is something that I would love to talk about, and if any of you are curious about, please feel free to follow up here. This is a group of people who believe government is the answer, not the problem. That old religious right was a Republican Reaganite religious right. And I don't know about y'all, but I grew up in Orange County, California in the 1980s. And when all of my parents and their friends were talking about Ronald Reagan, you know why they liked him? Because he said government's the problem, not the answer. But guess what? If nobody will listen to you and your narrow retrograde vision of patriarchy and masculinity and heteronormativity, if no one will listen to your myopic understanding of how American society should live, you need a big menacing government to control and impose the people. You need a big menacing government that will go everywhere from an individual's doctor's office to their bedroom, to their dinner table, to their public square in their community and say, we will tell you how this is supposed to go. They want a government that is so big it controls every aspect of your life. This is the idea of Reaganite conservatism is dead. There's no more laissez-faire economics. They do not want the invisible hand. They want a strong fist that will punch anyone in the mouth who doesn't listen. So democracy is the problem, not the answer, because the majority won't listen. I've been over this. And number 4 is, well, Caesar will save us, as Joel Webbon said. A second American Revolution, to seat a king rather than to get away from one. Why? Because Western civilization is superior to all others. And this is where the supremacy comes in. It's no longer a matter of, well, we just need to vote because we have the majority. We're moral. We're the religious right. It's this. If you're coming across the border from Latin America, if you're coming here from South Asia, if you're somebody who's a refugee from Southeast Asia, if you're somebody whose family traces its heritage to Africa, if you're people who are Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, you come from an inferior civilization, and therefore you are unassimilable. It's not just that you're not on top of the hierarchy. It's that you'll never be assimilable into the hierarchy, and you need to go. The idea of mass deportation, the idea that we need to cancel H-1B visas, the idea that we need to legislate into existence a Christian public religion. Most of the people I've talked about today want it to be illegal for there to be places of worship that are not Christian. A Hindu temple, a gurdwara, a synagogue. They want that to be outlawed by policy. Most of the people I've covered today want to stop immigration, period. And some of them think that we need to get rid of 100 million people from this country in order to save it. They see revival as going to the playground in their city and not seeing anybody who is brown or black or Asian, anybody who's wearing garb that would suggest that they're Muslim or Hindu. That is Christian revival to them. And it's also radically, radically patriarchal. Most of them want to repeal the 19th Amendment. Some of them would say that revival in this country would be women who get abortions receiving the death penalty. That is how they want to renew Western civilization. They have this strange idea, and I'll close on this, that Western civilization was born in Greece. It grew in ancient Rome. It flowered in medieval Christendom. It went international in early modern Europe and the colonizing imperial efforts of England and France and Spain and so many others. And then it really hit its apex in the United States, the city on a hill. And my argument today is the difference between Christian nationalism and Western Christian supremacy is it is not a desire to go back to the 1950s. Leave it to Beaver. This is a desire to go back to the 1650s or the 1150s, because that's the only way to restore order to what they believe is a superior Western civilization. And that's bad news for everybody who doesn't look and sound like them, who is not a white Christian man. And so to me, when we think about the threat facing our democracy, we're in a strange place where the idea of democracy itself is in question. That makes everything you're doing in Indivisible and everything that we're all doing across the country even more important. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Brad. Thanks, Matt. We're going to take questions now from the audience. I want to, while we're getting that lined up. Karen will come around with the microphone if you want to raise your hand, if you have a question you want to ask Brad. So Brad, I want to ask you about Pete Hegseth. You talked a couple of times about him and kind of tie into that last point that you were making about Western civilization. And now that we're at war with at least one other country, Iran, and he's our Secretary of Defense, how does his Christian nationalism play into that whole thing, and where do you see it going because of that?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is it plays directly into that. So, Pete Hegseth converted under the guise of a denomination that was at least inspired by Doug Wilson. And so the idea in that theological and church space is that Western European society is superior to all others because there has been the influence of Christianity in that society for longer than any other. Now, some of you are historians and you're like, that's not true. And I agree. I'm happy to talk about that. And it's kind of beside the point for today. But Pete Hegseth is also a man who has tattooed on his body two Crusader symbols, right? The Jerusalem cross and the phrase Deus Vult. My colleague Brian Kaler has also reported that he has those symbols on his Bible. In essence, Pete Hegseth embodies what I just talked about. He's not after the 1950s, he's after the 1150s. He sees himself as a knight on a crusade against a Muslim society in order for there to be Christian domination in the world. So he's happy to bend his knee to the king, Donald Trump, if he gets to be the heroic, chivalrous, elite knight who goes out into the world and defends Western civilization. You also see this in his deeply retrograde understanding of gender. He does not think women should be in combat. He also doesn't think that if you are not Christian, that you should have a chaplain who can give you spiritual guidance as you serve in our military. He changed the chaplaincy from having over 200 codes, meaning if you're a humanist, if you are Wiccan, and you are in our armed services, there's a chance you can find somebody to give you spiritual guidance or mentorship when you're, I don't know, going through something really difficult like war. He reduced that significantly because he said, well, those aren't real religions. So Pete Hegseth's Christian supremacy has a direct role in our foreign policy and the way our military works. Doug Wilson, one of the people he looks up to, said in a CNN interview that women are the kind of people that people come out of. And in response, Pete Hegseth quote tweeted and said, all of Christ for all of life. Like, I agree, brother. You got it right. So I could go on and on about Pete Hegseth. I've been on TV talking about him forever. If you have 3 hours, call me and I'll give you the full rundown. But yeah.
Are there any questions? Oh, yeah.
Okay. The great people together had similar ideas and to kind of get them going, right? They really were able to take over the country in many ways. How do we build societies? How do we build communities where we can also now, fight against this, right? In a positive way, right? Because all I see is from these tools just negative things, and I don't think people at their core want negative things.
Did you hear that, Brad?
I think so, but how can we fight back against this kind of ideology? Is that right?
Yeah, in a positive way, because they seem to be just negative in everything they do.
I think there's a really good example that from the last week that has kind of gotten overshadowed by everything in Iran, by Trump comparing himself to Jesus, by Pete Hegseth quoting a Pulp Fiction prayer. There's a lot of stories out there demanding our attention. The story to me that really has not gotten enough attention is the fact that Viktor Orban lost in Hungary. Viktor Orban is the man that everybody I talked about today looks to as the model of what they want. Somebody who legislates patriarchy and religion and everything. And somebody who did so by capturing the media, the legislative branch, and every other institution in his country. And guess what happened? He still lost. Viktor Orban's loss should be an encouragement to everybody who's part of any indivisible group across this country. Because what it shows you is this: Viktor Orban, by trying to make his country into a retrograde Christian supremacist place, made Hungary into one of the poorest countries in Europe, one of the places that was refusing aid from the EU, and a place where normal people got sick of their lives not working, not getting better, not having enough food, healthcare, transportation, education, infrastructure, so that they could have a good life. All of this rhetoric. Do you all remember a year ago when Trump and Elon Musk and everybody seemed indefeatable? I mean, do you just remember those days? I do, as somebody who covers this, and I have, I spend 10 hours a day on this stuff. It's not cheery work most of the time. Those months felt awful, right? I mean, Elon Musk is at the Treasury, right? They're destroying USAID, U.S. Institute of Peace. They're stealing everyone's. I mean, it just felt like we can't win here. It's over. The country's been torn down. And I tell you what, a year later, we have a situation where in 1 week, Viktor Orban lost. Donald Trump is looking like an idiot every minute that he tries to do anything in Iran. He's gotten himself involved in something that is backfiring in terms of gas prices, affordability. He looks like an imbecile. His Secretary of Defense just quoted Pulp Fiction in a worship service. Kash Patel, it's been reported widely by The Atlantic and others, doesn't show up to work half the time because he has a substance abuse problem and people don't know if he's actually still on the job. You're going to have to excuse my language here, but there was a report this week that Robert F. Kennedy, Health and Human Services, stopped on a family trip at one point because there was a raccoon carcass and he cut off its penis to keep for some reason. At some point, they start to look like the clowns they are. And people's lives aren't working. We don't have education. We don't have infrastructure. We don't have healthcare. We can't afford rent. We can't afford a house. We can't afford to put gas in our car. We can't afford to go on vacation. We can't afford to save for our kids' future. None of it works. And they keep getting richer. At some point, I think you all have to realize that Indivisible Livermore and every other indivisible chapter that stands for democracy is winning. And now is not the time to think that we need to feel as if we're ineffective or there's no momentum. The momentum is all here. And it's April. And I know 7 months is a long time. But if you go into the summer with the sense that he's gotten us involved in something in Iran that he can't get out of, that he is picking a fight with the Pope every time he turns around, insulting Catholics throughout this country, working class people can't afford their to get to work every day and put gas in their car. Nobody can afford a summer vacation. By the time we get to Labor Day, there is an absolute avalanche coming. So we just need to keep doing what we're doing and not give up because it is having a dramatic effect.
A few other questions.
So we know the technocrat billionaires who have bent the knee. Are there any significant examples of technocrat billionaires that are pushing back against the 2025 plan?
There's two I can think of who I think are worth mentioning. I think one is somebody who is not in the news a lot, and that's Mackenzie Scott, who just keeps giving money to HBCUs and to nonprofits and to educational institutions. So, I think that's one. I think somebody who's trying at least, and I know some of you might roll your eyes, and so this is not me saying that I'm a true believer or anything, but Reid Hoffman, he really split with the PayPal mafia way back when, and Elon Musk and Peter Thiel and those guys. And, he started Netflix, and his politics are much different than the rest of them. I think, though, for me, our best bet is not looking to oligarchs and aristocrats who are on our side, even though we need money and we need funding. And I think our best bet is saying they want to tell you that it's us against immigrants. They want to tell you that it's us against trans people, and it's us against the 1%. It's the many against the few. They want to seat a king so that the 20 or 30 or 200 people in this country who are billionaires can have all the power. It's us against them. The Epstein class, the billionaire class. we are the ones who have all the power, all the majority, all the momentum. They have dreams of some sort of oligarchic, aristocratic, post-Soviet Union, Putin-esque America. And we're the ones who are going to say, we just won't allow it. This is the fight of our lives. And you're just not going to get there unless you mow down all of us. That's what we saw when they tried in the Twin Cities, right? It's what we saw when they tried in LA. And so for me, I don't spend my time thinking about which billionaires are on our side. I think about the 348 million Americans who are not billionaires, who might be people that say no to them.
Question over here. Oh, I'm sorry.
Following on what you just said, I sometimes get frustrated watching the news or reading because I don't think the massive amount of corruption that's happening at the federal level and on down, but mainly driven by Trump, is being highlighted enough by the news media. And I think that that's something that could attract the attention if they would believe it of some of Trump's supporters because of the long-term damages.
Frustrated by corruption? Is that it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how, and the news media not really talking about it, and how if more Trump supporters knew about it, maybe that would turn them against him.
Here's my message. They're stealing from you. They're insider trading. They're taking your tax dollars. You all just did tax day. They're stealing from you. They're stealing from your retirement. They're stealing from your kids' education. They're stealing from your national parks and where you want to go camping this summer. They're stealing from your infrastructure, your way of life. They are taking your way of life. You want to talk about people taking your way of life? It's not immigrants and it's not trans people. They are taking your way of life. They are stealing from you every day. This president is a billionaire 10 times over because of being a president. He started a war, and now his sons are over there trying to sell drones to Middle East countries to protect from missiles. His son-in-laws are our biggest diplomat to the Middle East, even though he's not qualified and seems to have no sense of what he's doing other than looking good in Banana Republic suits that he bought. They're stealing from you. Everyone around him gets richer and you get poorer. You get less opportunity. You get less of a chance to be happy and healthy. That's a pretty good message. No one from the Democratic Party's ever called me, but I think that's a pretty good, commercial. If anyone wants to call someone over there and see if they want to cut that.
We have one more question. Two more questions.
Okay, so they are stealing from us. We don't have their money. How do we prevent this from happening? All those people that you named in the beginning, everything that Indivisible does across the country, all sorts of things. I mean, we've protested, we've written, what more can we do to stop these people?
Yeah. So I think I don't want to be dramatic, but the November elections this year are going to be a turning point in American history, period. And to me, it's not only that we need to elect folks who are not Republican and Trump lackeys, people that will turn the legislative branch into simply a formality, which is what they've done now. Something, a branch that has no backbone and no voice and no power. That's what they've turned it into. We need to elect people, Democrats or anyone else, who have the appetite to make sure that this does not happen again and that the people responsible for it are punished. Yeah. I wrote in Preparing for War that when J6 happened and you did not put Trump in jail and you did not put everybody involved, from John Eastman to everyone else in jail, you were just asking for it to get worse. And that's what's happened, right? Brazil put Bolsonaro in jail for 27 years. South Korea put its seditious president in jail for life, I believe. I have to look it up. We have to say, not only are we going to elect people who aren't Republican, we're going to elect fighters who are willing to say, you're criminals who are traitors to this country, and we're not going to have it. And not only are we going to punish you for what you've done, but we're going to enact sweeping reform that turns this place into an actual democracy, right? And make sure that this kind of authoritarianism and fascism doesn't come back. And to me, that includes widespread reform when it comes to finance and everything else, but it also means social media. It also means the ways that we think about how ideas and the press work in this country. There's so much there, but the general point is that the idea that we're going to elect folks and do the Nixon pardon thing, we won't survive. And I know some of you may not agree, and that's okay. You know, we can talk about it later, but the new president of Hungary has said it is time for those responsible for the Orban administration to get what's coming to them. And unless we have that spirit, we had a chance in Reconstruction. Some of you all know your history, right? We had a chance after the Civil War and we blew it. And that's how we got the KKK and Jim Crow and redlining and Chinese exclusion and everything else. And so if we blow it again, we may not survive this time.
One last question.
Yeah. My big concern is that the most likely event, in my view, is we're going to have either bogus elections or no election at all. I think that the Trump administration, those people have no intention of ever letting themselves lose another election. And it's going to take extraordinary action to even ensure that we can vote. Because they're already they've already done all this work to make sure that our elections are bogus. They're already rigged, but they're trying to rig them even further. And I think that, well, right now, they're preparing a plan so that they can declare a national emergency and just say we're not going to have an election.
So
That's my biggest concern. I mean, I'm confident that if we have a real election, that we will beat these guys. But I'm not all confident that we're going to have an election, or I think it's going to be bogus. If we're lucky.
So can you give us confidence that we will have elections?
Stand this.
Yeah.
We've got to fight between now and then to make sure we even have an election.
I agree. I could not agree more. And I tell you what, in my worst moments, I want to give into the doomerism and say, yeah, they're just going to cancel it, or it's not going to count. I would offer two ideas. One is Orban did everything he could to make sure that there was no ability to lose, and 2/3 of the country still voted against him. Okay. So it wasn't a majority. It was a super majority that they lost by. And when you lose by that much, you either have to say, well, we're going to get the military out here and try it, or we're going to give up. And he just said, well, I give up. I'm not going to try it. Number two is this. They tried everything they could in LA, in the Twin Cities, to terrorize Americans and put them into submission. And the Twin Cities especially showed up in an organized, militant, resolute way that said, we're not going to let you terrorize us. And the more you try it, the more that we're going to get everyday average Americans, suburban moms and school teachers, and you can shoot people dead in the street and we're still going to come. That's what it's going to take. So I hear you. I don't disagree with anything you just said. And to me, it's just, are we going to do that? Are we going to show up? 340 million people going to show up in a way that said they tried to take the Twin Cities, and Greg Bovino got fired after that, right? So give it a shot all over the country. See if you can rig every election in every place, and see if we'll let you. And that's our choice. That's our choice, right? Are we going to run and go home? I always tell people, like, it's easy. Let's go home and get a Subway sandwich and watch Netflix and just pretend none of this is happening. And we can do that. But I think that's the choice ahead, because I agree. They're going to try and rig it. The good thing for us is right now they look like clowns who can't get on top of Iran. They can't get on top of gas prices. They can't get on top of everything. So if we give into the idea that they will mastermind an obliteration of our elections, we've given up too soon because these people are jesters and we can't be bullied. We have to tell like in our neighborhood, the bully gets bullied. And if we have that attitude, then we'll win. If not, then yeah, God knows what'll be ahead for us.
Thank you, Brad. I think that's our last question. Thanks so much for tonight with this.
Thank you.
After.